Chapter 1. My house was a small and pleasant one. It had a courtyard with a bronze fountain in the shape of a fish's head and a tall gallery full of light and flowers. What I liked best about it, though, was the large window in the gallery that opened onto the square and the bustling outdoor market. I sat at that window nearly every morning before I went to work in my father's tailor shop and tried to draw the postures and gestures of the vendors in their stalls and the expressions of their customers. Again and again, I realized that no one has the same nose as anyone else and that each person has a different way of walking. One morning, I stayed later than usual at the gallery window. My father's voice brought me back from my world of lines and shadings and dropped me roughly into the reality of the workday. Arduino, are you going to spend the whole morning at the window? There's work to be done. He was standing at the gallery door. I put down my paper and pencil and followed him toward the tailor's shop, which was part of our house. There, day after day, my grandfather, my father, my brothers and I put in the thousands of stitches that together formed each piece and then the finished garments. The clicking of the needles against the thimbles counted the seconds. In the shop, my brothers were finishing up a pair of breeches. I found some basting that I had begun the day before and sat down to sew. I looked at my father, who had resumed his work at the cutting table. His hands moved with the agility of a magician's as he folded the silk in two, right sides together, and then rapidly marked 4 or 5 measurements that would serve as guidelines for cutting the fabric with his huge black scissors. He glanced up and saw me looking at him, then frowned and called me over. He motioned me toward the back of the shop, away from the others. "Son," he said sternly, "you haven't been concentrating on your work. You can't even get simple hems straight. It's hard for me, father." "Hard? At your age your brother Antonio was already embroidering doublés with pearls." "But Antonio," I started to say. "Antonio pays attention to what he is doing and nothing else. You, on the other hand, your head is full of drawing and sketching nonsense. You spend so much time at that window. You're 13 now. You should be refining your tailoring skills, not ignoring them. This is your opportunity to become a master. Do you know what the word master means?" "Yes, but—" "But what?" I felt trapped. I had to tell him the truth, for my father always knew by looking in my eyes if I was lying. "It's just that, for me, being a tailor is—" My father's face was redder than usual, and it frightened me. "I don't like tailoring," I said, all in a rush. My father stiffened. "You don't like it?" he said. "Tailoring is in your family trade. It is what your great-grandfather and your grandfather have done. It is what I do, and it is what your brothers do. We have illustrious clients who know us and place their trust in us. The whole city respects our name. Do you think you could go as far in another trade?" He was right. My father was proud of the place he had in society and of the way people, even outside Florence, spoke of his good taste, his skill with the scissors, his hard work, and his sense of honor. But it wasn't for me. "I want to be a painter," I finally dared to say, and my own voice sounded strange to me. "A painter? Do you know how difficult it is to become established as a painter? There are many young men who want to be artists. How many succeed?" "I will," I said, with as much conviction as I could muster. My father watched me in silence. His eyes were trying to read in mine the seriousness of my intentions. "Very well," he said gravely. "I will speak with Cosimo di Forli. He has an important studio and he owes me a favor or two." I knelt down and kissed my father's hand over and over. I couldn't think of any other way to show him how grateful I was. "Listen, Arduino," he said. "You will have only one chance. If Cosimo di Forli tells me that you have no future as a painter, or if he has any complaint about your behavior, you will come home to be a tailor like your brothers. Do you understand?" I nodded. The knot in my throat kept me from speaking. The following day, my father left the shop to meet with Maestro Cosimo di Forli. I knew that I was the subject of their discussion, and each moment my father was gone seemed to last an eternity. When he finally returned, he brought good news. The maestro had agreed to take me on as an apprentice, and I could go as soon as I was ready. My father said I would go in 5 days. That would give me enough time to finish up my work in the shop, to prepare what I would take with me, and to say goodbye to my friends from other shops around the square. Depending on the terms of the apprenticeship, which would be finalized on my arrival at the maestro's house, I might not be returning home for a while. My brothers said I was crazy. They were very happy to be tailors. Antonio, the oldest, loved fabrics and embroideries. He knew their textures with his eyes closed, and the perfect drape of a piece of silk or the combination of colors in a cape gave him great satisfaction. Tailoring was ideal for Enzo, 3 years older than me, because it was a respectable trade that allowed him to work at home and did not require him to exercise his legs, thin and twisted after a childhood illness. Antonio and Enzo both laughed at my dreams and tried to convince me that I was making a mistake. I listened respectfully to their advice and criticism, but at night, with my elbows on the ledge of the gallery window, I gazed at the tiny patch of stars over the empty square and knew in my heart that I was right. I wanted to learn the secrets of shapes and colors and somehow to express my feelings about beautiful and interesting people and things. My brother's words seemed less sensible when set against the strength of my dreams. But in the back of my mind there was that shadow of fear, the fear of failure and of the unknown that had always haunted me. The day I was to leave dawned so cold the rooster's crow almost froze in his throat. As soon as I heard his strangled cry, I jumped out of bed and began to dress. I hadn't slept all night from anticipation, and now I was so nervous I tore one of my stockings. When it was time to go, I bid my grandfather and my brothers farewell at least 3 times and checked over the satchel my father had made from some leftover cloth to hold my belongings. After one last goodbye to my old dog, Nero, father and I were on our way. Cosimo de Forli lived on the other side of the city in an old neighborhood with narrow streets and dark, mysterious-looking doorways. As we walked, my father was silent and thoughtful. I was nervous and impatient. To calm myself, I tried to think of my mother, who died so long ago that I could barely remember her face. At times, my faint memory of her gave me some comfort. Then, in my mind's eye, I said goodbye to the courtyard, the fountain, the outdoor market, and the workshop. I realized that I was truly leaving behind the Arduino from before, the tailor's son. The maestro's house had a decayed facade and a door knocker in the shape of a lion's head. A very large middle-aged woman answered our knock, her figure filling the doorway. "What do you want?" she said, frowning. My father introduced himself and explained why he had come, and the woman moved to one side. "Please come in," she said in a friendlier tone. "The maestro will be with you in a minute." We followed her into a dark, quiet room. She told us to wait, then disappeared behind a curtain. There was a little light coming from under the curtain, but as I looked around, the room was so dark I could see only the outlines of a table and a bench. The walls were nearly invisible in the shadows, and I couldn't tell if the shapes in the corners were chests or shelves. The silence was interrupted by the sound of someone clearing his throat. I turned quickly and saw a hand pull the curtain aside. There, in the dim light, was a short, stocky man wearing a dun-colored cap with pieces of his gray hair sticking out from under it. It was the maestro. He stepped into the room, letting the curtain fall behind him. He squinted and examined me from head to toe, pausing a moment when he arrived at my eyes. "Well, well, this is the boy," he said in a hoarse voice. "Arduino de Emilio de Antonio Neri," said my father, presenting me formally. "Arduino," said the maestro. "Let's see what you can do. Melania!" The woman, Melania, came out from behind the curtain and stood in front of it, blocking with her skirt the light that came from beneath it. "Melania," said the maestro, "bring us a sheet of paper and a candle." She nodded and left the room, returning a moment later with the paper and a lit candle, which she set carefully on the table. The maestro took a charcoal pencil from one of his pockets and handed it to me. "Draw a circle," he said. I could feel my knees shaking as I stood there. Nobody had said anything about a test. My performance now might decide my future as a painter. It isn't as easy as it seems to draw a perfect circle. I knew it was the test of a steady hand, common in workshops, and is often a dare among the boys who work there. I was sure of my ability. I had drawn hundreds of circles, but I was not so sure of my nerves. I took a deep breath and drew. The circle was nearly perfect. Cosimo de Forli looked at it and nodded. He pushed his gray hair back from his temples. "Let us draw up the contract," he said to my father. I breathed a sigh of relief. "Now, Arduino," he said, "you may draw what you like." I turned the paper over and thought. I had drawn my grandfather's hands on the head of his walking stick so many times that I had memorized their relaxed lines and the shadows that told the tale of many years of hard work. I sat down on the wobbly bench next to the table and tried to concentrate on the picture as I listened to their conversation. Cosimo was dictating the contract that would bind me to him. As was the custom in a painter's workshop, I would live with Cosimo de Forli for the next 3 years, serving him not only in his painting, but in whatever he should ask, obeying his orders and following his every instruction. The first year, my father would pay for my apprenticeship. From the second year on, the maestro would pay me a salary in proportion to my skills, which he would determine. I finished my drawing as they agreed on the last few details. "Very well, Master Emilio," the maestro was saying. "We agree on the conditions. I hope that the boy—" He stopped when he saw my drawing. He took the sheet in his hands and studied it slowly. Then he raised his eyes and looked at me piercingly. "What did you say your name was?" "Arduino," I said. It came out as a whisper. There was an awkward silence until finally my father spoke. "Very well, Cosimo. If at any time the boy misbehaves or slacks off in his work, send for me. I'll come right away. He is here against my wishes, and I need him at the shop, so at the slightest complaint he will leave painting and return to sewing." This was addressed to me as much as to the maestro. "I will keep it in mind," said the maestro, smiling, though in the flickering candlelight his smile seemed almost sinister. My father came over to me, and I stood up from the table. "Remember," he said, "your actions reflect on our family, and everything that you do or say will come back to us. Remember that." I nodded. He made the sign of the cross over me and left.